series of deliberate and deadly terrorist acts.
Several shots were fired as President Kennedy's motorcade passed through downtown Dallas.
None of us will ever forget this day. Yet we go forward to defend freedom and all that is good and just in our world.
Can you just say again, please?
You're going out of bounds.
Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
I have a dream. My 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today.
Welcome to the Hagmann Daily Show, weekdays 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern Time. And now your hosts, Joe Hagmann and Jon Robberson.
Hello and welcome to this Friday, May 11th, 2018 edition of the Hagmann Daily Show. And it is great to be here on this Friday. I'm going to kind of take a different direction in opening the show today. John and I were talking just before the going on air here, and we decided that, there's not really a lot of news. And John, that made me think real quick of, how we approach doing this show. And one thing that we have, been getting a lot better at, and I don't know if this is good or bad, but doing shows reporting on the news cycle is one thing, where you're reading and you're reporting and whatnot. But there's another side of talk radio that I don't think we do enough to do this, and that is to get to have more fun, to be more laid back, and to get our personalities across over the air. And that's hard to do when you're always talking about serious, intense subject matter, and you can't really kick back your shoes, put your feet up, and relax and have fun. But I think we need to do more of that.
Let's do that today, man. First of all, happy Friday to you, brother. I just had to giggle at the outset of your brief introduction, because I could tell in your voice that you wanted to laugh a little bit too. And the reason that we're both carrying on, listeners, is because about half the time before we go on air, Joe and I will speak offline, and we'll talk about what articles we've curated. And then we supplement those articles with being pretty quick on the search engines. And, while Joe is talking about, I don't know, fiscal deficits or whatever, I'll come up with something. And that's kind of how we do it. Today I was going through my curated news with Joe, and I got to about the 4th article, and I finally just gave up, and I was like, I've got nothing.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
We were spinning our wheels earlier with reports of 2 school shootings in California, which it turns out one of those shootings was reported to be at an elementary school, but thankfully that the LA County Sheriff said that there was basically it was a false alarm. There's no evidence of a crime, but they're still investigating. And secondly, there's a shooting at a Highland High School in Palmdale, California, but no reports on any casualties. So, we see that going on. There's other stuff up on Hagmann Report. One of the other things, John, we didn't talk about, nobody's talking about 5 of the top ISIS leaders were captured. And all the networks are ignoring it. But anyway, we don't even have to talk about news if we don't want to today. But I want to say this. We actually have John put together an awesome Sunday weekend for us. We are going to be attending a Major League Baseball game, and we got really good seats, and we're all looking forward to that, John, Eric, and myself. So, we just want to get the day over with and have fun this weekend. Obviously, we do, but no, seriously, we've been looking forward to that for a whole week, so I'm glad Friday is here.
Oh, indeed, and you were really looking forward to it. And I was thinking about it this morning. It's only the 2nd or 3rd time in my life where I have to support my team. A lot of our listeners may know that I was born in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I've been a Giants fan since I was a really little kid. And it's really being a true fan of a sports franchise. When you grow up in the era I did, the Giants, Joe, were terrible for most of my childhood. They very rarely played over 500 ball. All through the 80s, they were marginal. They made it to the World Series in '89, where they played the Battle of the Bay against the Oakland A's, who were so dominant back in the McGuire-Canseco era. That they not only swept the Giants, but during, I believe it was game 2 of that 4-game sweep, we had a massive earthquake, and bridges fell down and the freeways came down, and it was just a huge mess. I worked in a hardware store at the time that the actual Loma Prieta quake went down. But I digress. We're going to the ball game this Sunday. We're definitely stoked on that. Back to this high school shooting, and then we'll talk for a minute about the ISIS thing, because that one really slipped through the cracks yesterday, Joe, and I had to dig for it this morning. But I found it based on President Trump's tweet and was able to track it down through DuckDuckGo. But first with the shooting, this may seem elementary or almost kind of obvious to our listeners, but when I first saw this break, about an hour ago, it just occurred to me, Joe, how many more kids, seriously, how many more kids need to be sacrificed at the place where they go ostensibly to learn how to become productive adults? How many more until the leftists give up their ridiculous ideology that is it's Potemkin village thinking is what it is. It's how great the world could be versus a real adult analysis of how the world is. And I'm just wondering how many more kids have to die in school shootings before somebody somewhere raises the alarm and says we need to put, I don't care if it's oath keepers, cops, off-duty cops, retired veterans. We'd be better off with retired football coaches with a carry permit at these campuses. But, Joe, the bottom line is this. When somebody starts shooting, somebody else has got to shoot them. And I can't think of any other solution. If anybody else has one, email us, because I've thought about it long and hard.
That's the the debate that's been ongoing in this country, and obviously the left and the more political solution is to ban guns, but that's never going to happen. So you need to figure out a better strategy for prevention and in case there is a shooting for you to engage. So, I mean, that's the debate that's been ongoing forever. And, one of the things that, and I'll just say this about President Trump, is he talked about, the arming the teachers and putting policies in place to move that forward. And he had a few rallies in the last few evenings, and there was one in Indiana. And also CNN interviewed some people here in Pennsylvania in Armstrong County. And this is the article from the Free Beacon. CNN got a huge dose of truth from Armstrong County, Pennsylvania voters who told CNN's Martin Savage that they were ready to vote for President Donald Trump again, thanks to his strong foreign policy. They expressed satisfaction with pulling out of the Iran deal, to moving the U.S. Embassy in Israel to Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. And they said that they'd vote for him again, and it's finally they're finally happy to see a strong American president. And it's not only the foreign policy that they're happy with; they're happy if you continue to read through these articles that they are happy about much of the president's policies, both foreign and domestic, with the tax cuts and his strong stance on the Second Amendment, and his continued efforts to try to fix the broken immigration system. So we see that regardless of what the hyperventilating, insane liberal left news media says, that the majority of the country resonates with Donald Trump, his message, his agenda, and the pro-Second Amendment aspect of that as well. You're never going to get, not in this generation at least, the majority of Americans against guns. And just to tie into what you said, John, when is this going to be fixed? There's no better time than now to try to put these measures in place to make things better for students in schools.
I couldn't agree with you more. When I used to work in corporate radio for a couple years, long story short, took a brief hiatus out of film and television production from 2006 to 2008 and went and worked for Salem. Mentioned it yesterday, in fact. Worked for Salem for KKLA, the biggest Christian conservative talk radio station on the West Coast, and in the second biggest market, being Metro LA. But anyway, during that period of time, it was interesting because what we saw, it was the beginning of the what would you call it? The era of mass shootings. It was really in about the mid-aughts that we started to see this happening with more regularity, and then it started to happen on what seemed like a more global level. We started hearing about it happening in Western Europe and other countries, and then, of course, right about, I would say, 2010, 2011, then it really exploded, where it just became, almost a weekly item in the news cycle. But at that time, working for that company, Joe, I had to have 2 separate credential passes just to access the garage where I parked my car and to get into the building where our offices were. I had to pass through 2 levels of security, be verified, and even though I worked in that building every day, if I, for whatever reason, did not have my credentials, I had to go through an extensive screening with security just to get upstairs to my office. So all of the parents that I worked with at that time, for the most part, just dropped their kids off at school, where the most security they have is maybe a couple of cameras. Interestingly, cameras that we never see footage from when these events occur. But they lock the doors, and that's their solution to lock the door. And regardless of what happened in 2012 at Sandy Hook Elementary, we saw how well a locked door kept an active shooter at bay.
Yeah, and John, I don't want to. I'm going to switch gears here because I just came across a very surprising piece of information. Not really that surprising, but I'm going to send you the video. Maybe I'll post this up on Hagmann Report. This is from 2 days ago. In Iraq, boxes of $100 bills. Literally, I'm looking at this video, and there is at least, I can see 12 boxes, and I'm talking $100 bills in stacks. Probably what? Those are $50,000 stacks. You're talking millions and millions and millions of dollars here. Millions of dollars that was confiscated by Iraqi police. 31 boxes filled with stacks of $100 bills smuggled from Iran into Iraq to be delivered to Hadi al-Amari, head of the pro-Khameneist regime, the Badr militia, and current Iraqi parliamentarian, for his re-election campaign, apparently ahead of a May 12th vote. But the question is about this, since it was smuggled from Iran, was this part of the $150 billion Iran cash deal where Obama administration flew pallets of cash into Iran? How do these people get their hands on this money? John, I'm going to send this to you. This is incredible. You got to, I can't believe how much money you're looking at here.
What I can't believe is that all of our listeners, when they did their taxes less than a month ago, didn't stop and consider, and maybe some did. That $150 billion came from somewhere, and I think we have this sort of flippant notion, Joe. The Federal Reserve's been printing money for years, and it's true, they have. Quantitative easing started in 2011, and there was a period of time where we were printing a couple $100 billion a month. But we need to always be mindful that that is not free money. Yes, we export it to the rest of the world, and we've got probably about the most clever exportation of inflation scheme in the history of mankind. But some of that printing of money, that egregious creation of currency, results directly in higher costs for limited, finite goods and services. It's a very, very simple equation. And Joe, because you're familiar, of course, with the Austrian School of Economics as well, that inflation is the most insidious form of backdoor taxation there is. Now, we look at people like G. Edward Griffin. We look at the late economist Milton Friedman. These people have noted in what I would consider pretty white paper format that by the time the average American citizen leaps this mortal coil, the federal government has recouped about 90 to 95% of the complete purchasing power of every dollar that American earned in their lifetime. Now, they only steal 30 to 35% of it through federal taxation, but Joe, they get the rest when you pay inflated prices for everything from gas to ground beef.
Yeah. Now I'm going to, I just emailed this to my phone, John. I'll send it to you, but I guess there's really no more point in talking about this specific story, except to say that we see, it's incredible. I'm just shocked by how much money, these American money, this is $1 part of the Middle East. How many more boxes and billions of dollars, are stashed over there or used by the Islamic State or any of these, insane terrorist or intelligence agency type black operations? It's mind-boggling. But let's move on from there, John.
Well, before we do, I want to just drop something on our listeners that I'm pretty confident most of them are not aware of, but it's interesting and it's quick. General Tommy Franks, the commander that headed up the entire Operation Iraqi Freedom back in 2003. I read his biography that came out and became a New York Times bestseller like 2004. I want to say maybe early 2005. And Joe, we had so much cash flowing into Iraq during the invasion and subsequent to the invasion of Baghdad itself, that we had a deal with the Saudis where General Tommy Franks himself was racing in a helicopter with several $1 billion of cash, because if they could get it deposited in a Saudi Arabian bank on Friday before the bank closed, the interest earned on this money by Monday morning was like $680,000. Okay, so that gives you an idea of the amount of our tax dollars that have just been flagrantly thrown at the failed nation state of Iraq. Imagine that. Just the interest on a deposit over a 3-day period back at the beginning of Operation Iraqi Freedom necessitated the commanding general himself to get in a helicopter with the cash and get it to the Saudi bank on time so that we wouldn't lose the $600,000+ in interest accrued in 3 days, Joe.
That's crazy, man. That's absolutely insane. And John, we'll probably never see that much money, in our lives combined. So, but what are you going to do? I mean, the Federal Reserve continues to print money without being backed by anything except the petrodollar, not backed by gold, no soundness as far as the fiscal policy of the Federal Reserve, unsustainable. The debt-based economics, and then continuing to print money and sell the debt, it's going to spiral out of control eventually. We all know that. I
think it kind of already is. Let me ask you a quick question, and I know you want to move on, but I'm just curious of your personal take on this, buddy. Do you feel like, especially since they brought the $100 bills out that are blue and have the strip in them, does it feel to you kind of like, 1996 they did the large image currency, they call it, and then I think it was 2010 or 11 we started seeing those blue $100 bills. Doesn't the money kind of feel fake?
I don't know. I haven't, to be honest, John, I haven't had that many. I haven't paid attention to the new $100 bills that much. I haven't played with them really. I've never been one to, fold up the money and play with it.
Because we don't have any of them.
I know, right? But even the ones I have come across, I haven't taken that close a look at them, to be honest. So I don't know.
Well, that part of that too could be the age difference between you and I. There's an 11-year age difference between Joe and I, and it's a lot of fun because we don't notice it very often, but we do in cultural things like music and TV shows and stuff like that, and in things like this. Because Joe, how old were you in 1996?
13.
Okay, so I don't think the average 13-year-old really had it on their radar when the Benjamins went from the currency that we've had since the day I was born in 1972 up until 96 when they brought out the big face bills.
Yeah, I remember that switch. But yeah, it's I don't know, the money thing. I wonder, the ability for people to counterfeit and whatnot, how hard that actually is. But it seems like with each progression that they do with the money, that they make it more complicated for people to be able to counterfeit, but people still do it. And next I heard they were thinking of phasing out possibly the $5 bill or creating like a $3 bill. If I remember the article I read last month correctly, they were thinking about making further changes or going back to what we see in Canada with coins, $1 or $2 coins. But, they continue moving forward with this. And at some point, the U.S. economy is either going to crash and burn or it's going to be morphed into a bigger, more international type economy. Because there's no way, except a crash or a bailout of some type with something that actually is backed by something, some type of wealth asset. Otherwise, this cannot last, as we say. Eventually, you're going to get to the point where you saw Germany pre-World War too, where they were having wheelbarrows of money that could not buy them a loaf of bread. Kind of what we're seeing in Venezuela right now. Absolutely what we're seeing in Venezuela right now.
Let me tell you something interesting quickly about you know that this is sort of a much the way folks that Joe rather likes to investigate the weather and planetary things, and he loves the telescope and the Weather Channel and all that. I have sort of a hobby of tracking, financial history or monetary history. I don't track it like Stephen Minking does because I'm not trained, but I enjoy it from a historical point of view, Joe. And two things come to mind. First, when you and I co-hosted the Hagmann Report night before last, I mentioned on air that I got a suspicious activity report written up on me when I went in and bought $400 worth of nickels. And it's funny because I dropped that remark and then we didn't discuss it at all. But I wonder if anybody scratched their head and was wondering what on earth was Jon Robberson doing at the bank purchasing $400 in nickels? That weighs like over 100 pounds. I think the boxes are like picking up a meteor. They come in $100 boxes. And the reason I was doing that is because in 2011, when quantitative easing, when we were going from QE1 to QE2 and friends of the Hagmann Report like Gerald Celente over at Trends Journal were just banging the gong and screaming into the wind about it, Joe, we were at a point where the nickel content, like the actual semi-precious metal nickel, was at 0.498 cents value per actual nickel. So the actual metal content of the nickel was just about to supersede the 5 cent value of the nickel itself. And it was projected to go to 6.5 or even 7 cents per nickel. So it
John,
was this,
you can't sell the coins based on weight. You have to melt them down, right?
Oh, I'm fully aware of that. My plan was to buy, a couple $1,000s worth of nickels. But, it's kind of a funny joke. The whole thing is, Joe, because back then I was expecting to go to bed on Tuesday night and wake up Wednesday morning with black helicopters everywhere and a bunch of RoboCops closing down, the 210 freeway 3 blocks from my house. So the whole thing is looking back on our history 5-6 years ago. But I think that's where a lot of our listeners were back then. It was, think about it, Joe, 2010, 11, 12, back in the early days of the Hagmann Report, it was kind of a panicky feeling.
Well, I don't know. That's I can't remember all the specifics that were going on. Obviously, Obama was in the middle of his first term. They had the healthcare bill passed, and there was a lot of changes happening, and it was moving at a very fast pace. But I don't ever recall being worried that something was about to drop, within the next day or anything like that. But yeah, there was a lot of alarming things going on. And as far as the selling the precious metals, the nickel, you would have to, I learned this somewhere, that you have to melt that down, that it's illegal. It's against the law to sell coins, whether it's be pennies for copper or nickels for nickel. To sell those by weight, you have to have them melted down, but you cannot sell the U.S. currency for scrap metal. That's some rule or law somewhere. I also saw an interesting video of a guy who said, who showed a great way to get, I guess you'd call it free silver, that you go into a bank, and as you said, John, you can buy, hundreds of dollars worth of coins. Well, what you do is you take $50 in and you ask for a roll of silver dollars. And you exchange, a $50 bill or whatever, $50 in cash for $50 in silver dollars. And apparently there are several or a few, usually silver dollars in those rolls. So you can extract those, exchange the rest of the coins back for cash that weren't silver, and then you basically get your $50 back plus maybe a few silver coins. And I saw that trick on YouTube, and I've never tried it, but it looked, the guy went to several banks and he got 3 or 4 coins just in the few minutes he did that.
Well, Joe, there's an interesting concept, and we can I guess move on after this if you like, but it's called Gresham's Law. And Gresham's Law simply indicates that bad money will always chase away good money. And this has been proven time and again. Joe, you mentioned the Weimar Republic back in the early 1920s, pre-Hitler Germany. But we've seen it happen in Argentina, Vietnam, Venezuela, Mexico, and the list goes on and on. More recently in Zimbabwe, right now I think I said Venezuela. And what it means is, for example, in 1964, when they took the silver content out of our everyday pocket change, prescient Americans back then took not only rolls, but entire boxes full of rolls of quarters, and they set those aside, understanding that the 1965 coins and forward would basically be just base metal content. Now, here's the trick. If in 1964, if you laid aside a $1,000 bag of say, let's just say quarters, of Washington quarters, they look almost the same as they do today. A $1,000 bag of those quarters today is worth an enormous amount of money. And I did the math a couple of years ago when my brother and sister-in-law bought a house outside of Portland, Oregon. I figured out that my brother mentioned, our house was $16,000 when it was built, and I think they paid close to $300 for it. And Joe, I did the arithmetic, and had you taken 16 $1,000 bags of quarters from 1964, again, these are with 90% silver content, and they're worth just under $3 a piece today. If you took those quarters, if you took 16 $1,000 bags and you laid them in your garage, the year my brother's house was built, you could take that technically to a coin dealer today and purchase that house in cash. So what does that mean? It means that precious metal, whether it's gold or silver, is essentially more or less immune to inflation. It's the only method that I know of that our listeners can use to beat the inflation clock. So if you want to take your $100 that you earned this week and you don't want the government to access it through the backdoor taxation of inflation, the only way that we know of to do so is to put that $100 in silver, for example. It's not about making money, listeners. It's about protecting yourself against the unlawful and unfair backdoor taxation of inflation. And once again, that is called Gresham's law. Bad money will always chase proper, good money, valuable money out of a society. And also, Joe, it's also one of the initial indicators of a failing society.
Well, that's very interesting. I don't think I've ever heard that before. Definitely something to take note of.
Well, I just made it all up. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, here I want to hit this. We mentioned the 5 ISIS terrorists that were captured as the mainstream media networks ignore this, but it's interesting how they did it. They did it through some kind of phone app where they lured these people across the border where they were able to then catch them. Pretty interesting that they were able to do it that way, but I wanted to make sure we mention that. If you want to read more, go to Hagmann Report. And then we have this other weird article from Starbucks. This is one thing I wanted to talk about. After these reports of people not being allowed to use their Starbucks bathroom because they had not made a purchase, went viral the other day or last week. Starbucks shut down for, I think it was like a 24-hour period to train all their employees on homelessness inclusivity or something. I don't know what they did, but the CEO has come out and issued a new policy as far as what they're going to do with Starbucks. And this is Starbucks chairman does penance. Anyone can use our bathrooms, customers or not. On Thursday, responding to the mid-April incident in a Philadelphia Starbucks in which 2 black men were arrested for loitering, Starbucks chairman Howard Schultz announced that Starbucks bathrooms will be open to anybody who wants to use them, whether they're a paying customer or not. And then if you want to read further as far as what the statement actually is, it's pretty hilarious. And this is why I don't ever go to Starbucks. These people, this company is run by one of the most rabid liberal minds in our country. And
Joe,
they're ridiculous.
You make an excellent point. We need to, and this is again, it's probably not what we would consider groundbreaking news here, but we as conservatives and as Christian conservatives, we need to, as much as possible, vote with our dollars. I don't go to Starbucks either. In fact, Joe, and this may sound crazy, but I've been in Erie, Pennsylvania for over 10 months. I have not been to Starbucks once in the entire time that I've lived in this city. They don't get my $3 to $5 for a cup of coffee because I disagree with the globalist no borders. We're going to hire 10,000 illegals into the company. This issue with restrooms, it's ultimately going to hurt Starbucks because, frankly, Joe, especially in urban environments like Los Angeles or San Francisco or any big metropolitan region, people rely on Starbucks to be able to go to the restroom. There's been plenty of times where I didn't even want a cup of coffee. I just went in there and bought it so I could use a reasonably clean restroom. When you're on a concrete grid that's 3,000 by 3,000 city blocks square. So it's going to hurt Starbucks ultimately. And this ties in interestingly, Joe.
It's going to become like a public library where you're going to have all the homeless people taking up seats and lines for the bathroom to take showers in the sinks and everything else. And at some point, they're going to, I guarantee this is what's going to happen. They're going to quietly change our policy back because they're somebody in the comment section writes it best and says that they're politically correct, not morally correct.
Let me ask you a question, buddy, in the spirit of this sort of laid-back conversation we're having here on Friday, May 11th. You and I are both fiscal conservatives, and we've had, innumerable conversations at this point about politics and what we think of this and that. We don't always agree on everything. This may sound crazy, especially coming from me, but when you look at the homeless situation, we've talked about this a lot lately, especially in places in California where it's warm during the winter, Los Angeles, the Bay Area, et cetera. If somebody gave you a vote, if they gave you a referendum vote, Joe, to spend less money on missiles and more money on giving homeless people, for example, a decent place to take a shower or a decent place to have a cot at night, if that vote was put to you personally, would you go for it?
Well, I don't know that I would sacrifice, depending on, if we have some kind of surplus in the military and there's no reason to, build more missiles at this time, then absolutely. But see, I think here's the question we need to ask ourselves, because this is one of the questions that so many people don't even get into when dealing with the homeless situation that I think we could do a lot for, and that is how many people are choosing to be homeless and live that way versus how many people actually want to get out of that. Because when you, this is obviously not true for, I would say, the majority of people, but there are a significant percentage of homeless people that are completely content with the way they live and don't want the responsibility of a normal life and are addicted to drugs or alcohol or whatever it is. And that's the way they choose to live. You have to separate those people from the ones that want to get out of it and get back to a normal life. And then from there, you institute different programs, I guess, to try to at least help the people, get cleaned up, get a job, who want to get out of that lifestyle. And the ones who choose not to, well, they're on their own. And they should be given no, no leeway as far as if they choose to live that way. Then they need to remove themselves from, the vast majority of the public. If they truly don't want to be part of society, then get out of society.
Well, you make a good point. When you look at the homeless situation, you've got the addiction issue, you've got financial issues, you've got mental illness issues that I would qualify as maybe less clinical, like what we might just colloquially call kind of, quote, having given up on life, end quote. And then you've got the clinical issues, like full-blown schizophrenia and stuff like that. And it's interesting. I'll drop this on our listeners, and I think that most of them will enjoy this because there's such a huge variety. But there's a YouTube channel called Today I Found Out, and it's produced by a really phenomenal YouTuber named Simon Whistler. And Today I Found Out covers all the most bizarre little cultural moments in history and factoids, and it's global, and it's just all these crazy little stories. They run anywhere from 6 to about 10 minutes on YouTube. And one of the more interesting ones they did, Joe, again on Today I Found Out, was they took a homeless guy and they gave him $100,000 with the proviso that they would track his life for the course of the time that he had the $100,000. And they chose this guy specifically because he had no history of drug or alcohol addiction. He liked to drink, but he wasn't a daily drinking alcoholic who had to have alcohol so as not to go into DTs. And I won't go into the whole story, but it was really fascinating to see what this man did with $100,000, because basically, without ruining the entire plot, he essentially blew it. He helped a couple other homeless people out. built this huge coterie of overnight friends that were all there for the money. He even got married. And of course, when the money ran out, his wife left him. And within about 14 to 16 months, he was right back on the same piece of cardboard on the same piece of sidewalk.
Well, that's very interesting. And yeah, again, I mean, what the people there should be things and systems in place there are, from rehabs to churches to other programs. But if there was a way to get people back on track, as far as, having a temporary halfway house for maybe 30 days where you give people a room and you help them find a job or whatever that is. But there needs to be more charity on a person-to-person level. But again, there is a huge percentage of people who are homeless that wouldn't want to change it. So I don't know. There's too many problems. They're moral, they're spiritual problems we see in our society, and a lot of these things are not going to be fixed until we see those other changes in these people's lives. John, I want to kind of switch gears here. I'm going to play a quick clip from Fox News about the feud between Devin Nunes and the Department of Justice, and we're going to talk about this, but we're going to listen to this clip first. So this is from Fox Business News just today.
A Justice Department showdown. House Intelligence Committee Chairman Devin Nunes now says talks with the Justice Department about handing over classified documents related to Robert Mueller's Russia probe will continue, calling discussions with officials productive. This is the Washington Post reports that the subpoena issued last week requested documents about a specific individual described as a longtime intelligence source for the CIA and the FBI. For his part, House Speaker Paul Ryan is backing Nunes' request.
I think this request is wholly appropriate. It's completely within the scope of the investigation that's been ongoing for a while with respect to FISA. I actually think that this is something that probably should have been answered a while ago. I've spoken with Chairman Gowdy. I've spoken with Chairman Nunes. I've spoken with the Deputy Attorney General on this. I expect that we will be able to have an accommodation.
The Justice Department says complying with Nunes' request could endanger the lives of intelligence sources. Joining us right now to weigh in on all of this is former U.S. Attorney, partner at Avenue Strategies, Bud Cummins. Bud, it's good to see you this morning. Thanks so much for joining us.
Good morning.
So this has been over a year since Nunes is requesting these documents. He had to subpoena them, and they're still pushing back. Do you think Nunes ultimately gets his hands on these documents?
You know, it's hard to say because it sounds like they have articulated a legitimate concern about the safety or of revealing the identity of this source. And when that's a real concern, it's a real concern.
Yeah, but
Rod Rosenstein and the DOJ has an obligation.
I don't know if you saw an op-ed in the Journal yesterday about this. The editorial board wrote, basically, the Washington Post had all the details of who this source was. That, that he leaked. And it just seemed like somebody leaked some information to the Washington Post. The story that this is such an important source and we cannot give it up because it's going to be national security.
Sorry about that. All right, we can stop there. You get the gist of it, and I got another report that's up on Hagmann Report to kind of summarize this and put it into better perspective. And that
interesting timing, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Is Devin Nunes on the trail of the mysterious insurance policy? And this is an article from Red State. One of the central features on the ongoing fight between House committees, the Intelligent Oversight and Judiciary, Rod Rosenstein, Christopher Wray, the Department of Justice, and the FBI has been the production of documents concerning the genesis of the counterintelligence investigation that has mutated and morphed into Robert Mueller's indictment O-Rama. And it goes on to talk about specific information like Nunes' letter to Rod Rosenstein and FBI Director Wray demanding they comply with the committee's subpoena or be held in contempt of Congress back on April 4th. Now, Nunes also threatened to hold Jeff Sessions in contempt of Congress. And as you just heard on that report, the DOJ is pushing back, saying, well, it could, if we declassify this information or show the House Intelligence and other committees this information, it could endanger the lives of intelligence personnel. And it's just amazing that we have this whole investigation and it's clouded in complete secrecy. The evil people who conspired to create this conspiracy against President Trump have been able to use the same protective methods that are used by investigators to protect their own information, to protect this conspiracy. So they're using U.S. law and law enforcement and intelligence agencies to protect their own crimes and conspiracies. And then when threatened with contempt of Congress, they turn over, a less redacted statement, but never turning over the information that's asked for.
Well, they can't do that because, as soon as you pull one apple out of the stack, you're going to be chasing apples down the road. Interestingly, Joe, this kind of slipped past us last month, but I think it's worth mentioning, and this is why I made the comment, interesting timing. From usatoday.com, Matthew Cooper wrote back on April 17th, Donald Trump pardoned Scooter Libby. And it's interesting to remember the whole Valerie Plame story from the George W. Bush era. And this is, of course, part of what put former George W. Bush aide Scooter Libby in the clink. And what we have here is a situation.
I don't know much about that story, but wasn't he railroaded heavy? I mean, big time?
Well, he was. And it was the reason I bring it up is because it's an interesting opportunity to compare and contrast how the liberal mainstream media back in 2000, it was either 2005 or 2006. I think it was 2005 when that story was just raging. It was headline news every day for a long time. In fact, it might have even been late 2004, right before the Bush-Kerry election. That story, Valerie Plame got more rubber on the road than I thought it really deserved. And I think most Americans really got fatigued with the story. But, Joe, it led the news on all the cable news networks every night for a long time. And long story short, Valerie Plame was a CIA intelligence asset. She was an analyst, not a field agent. And her name got leaked. And this is, during the sort of quintessential apex of the war on terror. It's a couple years after 9/11, a few years after 9/11. But of course, when it was George W. Bush on the chopping block, the mainstream media did what they always do. They all of a sudden find this false moral plateau that really, Joe, with mainstream media news does not exist. There is no moral plateau at NBC News or CBS News or CNN News. There really isn't a moral plateau at Fox News either. There's just a more conservative leaning bias at that particular news outlet. By the way, the only one that I can really watch as far as those things are concerned. So what we have here, the entire investigation going on, Joe, yesterday we had Vice President Pence publicly state, Mueller, your time is running out here. Okay. And we've seen this story extrapolate out to the most recent things about Attorney Cohn and the suspected or the purported channeling of funds. Perhaps there was some conspiracy involved. Perhaps there was misappropriations, financial malfeasance, etc. But this is how far off the trail this Mueller investigation is run. Are we even investigating the president and these supposed ties to Russia anymore? Or are we investigating somebody named Michael Cohen, who nobody on the planet even knew who he was less than 30 days ago? And so, again, our listeners need to be very discerning and very careful as they see this coverage as we move into the summer, because we have an investigation in search of a crime, and we have a swamp. We have an inside the Beltway hub of both Republicans and Democrats who are political operatives, and the last thing they want is what our good friend Craig Sawman Sawyer says all the time. The last thing they want, Joe, is for that sunlight to come in and act as an antiseptic.
That's right. John, I want to kind of switch gears here because something just came across my desk that is pretty interesting. I have not had
It's not another bee, is it?
No. I had two bees that got into my office the other day.
Yeah, do you want to just take 15 seconds and explain to our listeners what happened the other day?
Well, I have in my office here, I have two windows, and apparently one of my windows only has half of a screen in it, and I cracked a window open, and a couple of honeybees got in here, and I was able to get them back out without killing them, but it took a little doing. So that happened during the middle of our interview with Stephen Menking on Wednesday. So as we're bringing Stephen Menking on, I'm typing to Steve and John. I'm saying, I got to mute out. I got bees in my office. I got to take care of this. So that was kind of
It was pretty funny. We instant message one another back and forth just to make sure that we're kind of staying on track. We really don't even use it that much, folks. But it was funny because Steven had just joined the broadcast. So Joe, as the sort of the number one host, it's sort of his job to bring him in and say hello and go through the pleasantries, etc. But he had to balk based on the fact that you were invaded by the bees.
Yeah, it's not fun trying to do a broadcast with honeybees, less than 12 inches away from your head buzzing around. It's a little unnerving, so had to take care of that problem first so I could do the broadcast.
All right, back to the story. I threw you off track, but nonetheless, good story.
I haven't heard this audio yet, but I want to play this based on the headline. Maxine Waters explodes on House floor. I resent making America great again. California Congresswoman Maxine Waters doesn't want to hear any talk about making America great again, especially if it's coming from white men. Waters went off on the rails at a recent House debate when Pennsylvania Representative Mike Kelly had the audacity to suggest the country needed to shift focus from what divides us to what unites us. And let's just listen to this clip. I'm not sure how long it is, but here we go.
We are trying to make sure that we're making America great every day in every way. And the best way to do that is to stop talking about discrimination and start talking about the nation. We're coming together as a people in spite of what you say. Thank you, gentlemen. I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. Members are reminded to address their remarks to the chair. The gentleman from Texas reserves, the gentlelady from California.
Thank you very much. The gentleman, Mr. Kelly, please do not leave. Because I want you to know that I am more offended as an African-American woman than you will ever be. And this business about making America great again, it is your president that's dividing this country. And don't talk to me about the fact that we don't understand what happens on the automobile. No, I will not yield. No, I will not yield.
Okay.
Don't tell me that we don't understand. That's the attitude that's been given toward women time and time again.
The gentlelady will suspend. The chair wishes to remind all members that they are to address their remarks to the chair. Gentlelady will continue.
The chair, but don't stop me in the middle when you didn't stop him in the middle. And so I shall continue. Don't you dare talk to me like that and think that somehow women don't understand what goes on the floor of automobile dealers.
Minded to direct her remarks to the chair. The gentlelady will continue in order.
I will continue to do that. However, I don't appreciate that you did not interrupt him when he was making those outrageous remarks about him knowing more about discrimination than I know about discrimination. I resent that, and I resent the remark about making America great again. He's down here making a speech for this dishonorable president of the United States of America. Having said that, I reserve the balance of my time, and no, I do not yield not 1 second to you. Not 1 second. Not 1 second to you.
All that anger about what? Wow. About nothing. Nothing. What a psycho.
First of all, Maxine Waters, the honorable representative from California's 43rd district, really doesn't need to concern herself whatsoever with making America great again, because in the 43rd district, people are trying to find jobs or to make a sandwich great again. I mean, the 43rd district, Joe, is almost slipped up, is really just one series of ghetto neighborhoods after another. And when you drive through her district, when you drive on Washington, or when you drive on Venice Boulevard, it's sad, because what you see, by the way, listeners, I traversed through Maxine Waters' district every day if I happen to be working at Fox or Sony or Culver Studios. So that's how you get back to Pasadena if you want to stay away from the 405. So you drive down these boulevards, Joe, and there's one mom and pop business after another that's closed, that's gone out of business. Everything you can imagine, from Bible bookstores to fried fish shacks. And they are just boarded up, and the real estate sits there. This is real estate, 5 miles out of downtown Los Angeles, 5 miles southwest of Hollywood. Maxine Waters' district is a grim example of what the entire country will look like, Joe, if the blue wave happens at the end of this year. And can you imagine how much, I mean, that was a great meltdown, but imagine if Nancy Pelosi had the gavel. I mean, Maxine Waters would still be talking right now.
Nancy Pelosi is another one who seems to have, I don't even know what, some kind of psychological impairment ongoing. And I don't know that it's a big deal that it keeps her from doing her job, but all the stuttering and the misremembering and misquoting. I don't know if you heard what she said the other day, John, but she was talking about the tax cuts. And I read this story yesterday or the day before, and she was being interviewed or talking to somebody about these tax cuts in a public forum. Maybe it was the local NAACP or something. And she was talking about how the businesses and all the bonuses that were given, and it's only helping the 1%, and going on and on about the crumbs, but she couldn't remember what denomination to say. She started saying all the millions, all the billions, all the trillions, and she kept going on and on because she couldn't remember what she was supposed to say. But she's losing it too. All these people are psychopaths, degenerates, that 95% of them, I'd say. And Maxine Waters is an example on full display of what you can expect if we continue to elect a Republic or a Democratic social justice, unhinged type like Maxine Waters. And if we get the Democratic majority back in the House, yes, Nancy Pelosi will have the gavel again.
Well, look at what Maxine Waters did in that meltdown. She played the race card, she played the gender card, and she played the socioeconomic card. Boom, boom, boom. Right out of the standard libtard playbook. And we need to remember, politics. Joe. Go ahead. I'm sorry, brother.
No, identity politics.
Identity politics. It's virtue signaling from a person who has no virtue. And again, I want to reiterate this. In her district are thousands and thousands of African Americans who have served our country, many of whom have gone to college, many of whom have either been small business owners or attempted to open small businesses. And Maxine Waters' district is a ghetto. It is a socioeconomic, repressed, boarded up ghost town of crime and crack. And that's and this woman has the audacity to stand on the floor of Congress and scream like she's actually representing her people. And the only person that Maxine Waters represents is Maxine Waters.
Yeah. And I don't know, I think I mentioned this before, John, but we've never sat down and listened to it. I try to listen to Michael Savage, especially when I'm doing stuff like dishes or cooking. And when I'm in my kitchen, I'll turn on the podcast from the day before from his show. And I heard him talking with a caller one time about the ridiculous the roads, how all the highway funds and the funds to fix the roads have been stolen, and the pensions, and how corrupt San Francisco is. But then he was talking with this caller, got into a more comical conversation about the local traffic reports. And Michael Savage said, if you ever listen to pay attention to the local San Francisco traffic reports from the station that he's on. So I started listening to these things, and you talk about comical traffic reports. I mean, constantly, every day you hear reports. Report right trucks throwing garbage bags onto the highway, mattress here. Somebody throwing a box of kittens here, and it is insane.
Absolutely.
Just hearing that traffic report. So, and then you see the pictures from the BART system where you have all these people using drugs on the side of the subways and train stations. I mean, that city, and then the reports of the whole city where there's human feces on hundreds of streets.
Where they have to map it out. Joe, we're getting short on time, and I'm unlike Maxine Waters, I am going to relinquish the rest of my time back to the chairman of the House, Mr. Joe Hagmann. But I'll make this my final comment for today, because Joe, I think you'll be able to riff on this easily for the next few minutes. It's got to start locally, okay? God bless President Trump. God bless the First Lady. I'm thrilled that we pulled it off in 2016. But the African Americans and the Latinos and the Asians and all of the different ethnicities in the major metropolitan areas of this country, Joe, they're not just a bunch of dummies. They can look around and see what's happening. And I think that as we see the successes with our president pile up, like the enormous tax cuts, like the sit down in North Korea that's coming here in a few weeks, when we see these successes build on a national level, I'm hoping that it inspires the people who are stuck in ghettos like the 43rd District of California, to look around and say, what have these people, honestly, just a simple question, what have these people done for me lately? And the answer is nothing.
Well, no, these people, they're more concerned about, the drug addicts and the illegal immigrants more so than the American citizens. So it's really unfortunate. John, I just looked at the clock. I wasn't even paying attention to the clock. We do only have about 4 or 5 minutes left, so I want to do just a quick thing here. Go to Hagmann Report. Check out the stories that are up there. One of the things we didn't get to today is the Stormy Daniels lawyer, Avenatti. Is his name, and he is under some legal hot water right now because of how he obtained and handled classified bank records. And not only that, he disclose personal private information about Michael Cohen's finances. He also disclosed financial information about a wrong Michael Cohen. So he's in some legal hot water. There's a Treasury investigation that apparently has opened up into him and into that leak of information. So that's something we're keeping our eye on. Also, Rosie O'Donnell has been in the news over the breaking and violating of the campaign finance laws, the same thing that Dinesh D'Souza was arrested and jailed for. And this is important because it's not like she just overdonated. She did so in a very deceptive way by making different variations of her name on the mailing and checks that she filled out and sending them from different addresses as to make it look like different people, meaning she knew exactly what she was doing. And then she did an interview the other day where she stated that it is not her job to make sure she didn't donate too much. It's the candidate's job to send back any money in case they overdonated. But guess what? Ignorance is not an excuse for violating the law. And she should be charged. And that's the bottom line of it. And will we see that? Experts from the legal profession say, yes, she's in hot water and expect charges. So that's a few things we're keeping our eye on, as well as the Middle East, what's going on between Israel and Iran and in Syria. And we have some information on Assad. Assad is basically saying that this war could turn into a much larger conflict in very short time, and also throwing some jabs at President Trump. So a lot of things going on. And then tonight on Hagmann Report, we have Dr. Ted Broer in Austin. They'll be with us tonight. And then our sponsor, don't forget, simplycleanfoods.net. They have some new products out there: blueberries, pineapples, cauliflower, and more. Chance came on yesterday, talked about the alternative media pack. Use promo code SimplyClean. And if you have a chance, we mentioned this earlier, on the 9th of May, Mark Dice did a video. Google's creepy new AI bot. If you get a chance, it's making this footage is making a lot of, it's basically gone viral. Not the Mark Dice video, but the footage of the new Google AI bot. And it's very human-like. So if you get a chance, listen to that video and check out what they have been able to do, at least only what they've released publicly of what they've been able to do as far as making AI sound like a human. John, I don't know if you heard that, but the bot says things in conversations and in sentences like and to mimic human speech patterns.
I'm glad I was born in February of 1972, Joe. The society that we're moving into, and I think we should focus some energy on this next week here on the Hagmann Daily Show. We are entering and really building ourselves. We are willingly building a surveillance grid around us that will not be managed and mitigated by other human beings who can at least empathize with our disposition, but it'll be managed and mitigated by AI. And AI will do what it's programmed to do.
Yeah, and that is, as Elon Musk says, they're summoning the demon, and that's exactly what they're doing. Well, it's been a great week again. Simply Clean Foods is our sponsor. If you want to support this show independently, do so through purchasing foods from simplycleanfoods.net, promo code SimplyClean. And we will be back tonight on Hagmann Report, and then you're not going to hear from us until Monday, unless something very major happens. but we are headed to the ballpark on Sunday. And John, I'm really looking forward to that. We have to coordinate a little bit, so maybe we can take some pictures and after we come back, post something up on Hagmann Report about our little adventure.
Yeah, about you and Eric looking really glum when the Giants smoke the Pirates this Sunday in Pittsburgh.
Hey, I'm not a Pirates fan, John.
I know. God bless Tech, Eric. And real quick, remember when you support simplycleanfoods.net, listeners, it serves Joe and I to a very small degree, but also Tech Eric, who is the third partner in the Hagmann Daily Show.
That's right. We're out of time.
The Hagmann Daily Show is brought to you by the Hagmann Report. Tune in to the Hagmann Report weekdays, 7 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time. For more information, go to HagmannReport.com. That's HagmannReport.com.